Can start now. Dear participants, we are happy to welcome you at the final webinar. This is Activist ABC. This is going to be on intellectual property in plain language, impact on access to TB treatment. During the webinar, you will find out the significance of intellectual property in the context of modern TB treatment strategies, transition to short regimens, and development of new medications. So what is the role of patents for access to treatment, and what can be done by activist civil society at the regional and country level to expand access to modern treatments? We are grateful to our partners, ITPC, for EECA, for this opportunity to have this joint webinar. And we pass the floor to our speaker, Sergei Golovin, ITPC EECA, a consultant. He has more than 10 years of experience in community-led monitoring, analysis of public procurement, intellectual property, and access to treatment of HIV, tuberculosis, and hepatitis. You're welcome. Hello. Can we start now? I guess so. Let's go. Okay, so good afternoon, dear participants. I would like above all to express gratitude to TB Europe Coalition for the invitation to participate in the webinar, for that you've made it possible to speak about this theme that really appeals to me. What's especially valuable for me personally, it is this experience that we have accumulated, we can now speak in practical terms about it. This theme is quite challenging, and as for the last final webinar, it is quite appropriate in that sense. And it would be important for me to share with you the lessons learned and the conclusions that activists have accumulated in this area, starting maybe in 2010, and also the mistakes that have been made and some practical takeaways. And maybe you hear that when we speak about TB, now in the region, a lot of things are happening that are linked to patents. Maybe you have heard about various campaigns associated with Bedicolin, with this product, and we will speak in more detail about that today. And a couple of more words about plain language. So this is going to be quite a basic presentation. I will be happy if you ask questions. And I remember when I first started exploring this topic, I had that book from UNDP, and they covered various aspects of patents. So when in the underground, I would read this book, and only after a month I started getting something. However, I believe that any theme can be explained in simpler terms. And if anything is unclear, I don't know how to technically it will be organized, but I believe that you can write questions to the chat or address them to organizers. So thank you for the introduction, and now let's proceed with the presentation. Let's start with the basic things. Here you can see two slides in Russian and in English. That's how we are going to do that. This is quite a lot of text, but this is my only slide that is so textually intense. Here I try to present the context, the background. Maybe you know that now new approaches to eradicate TB are being developed. In particular, this is global plan to end TB for the period of 2023 through 30. And this slide, I highlight components of this plan that is focused on therapist treatment. And this is a lot of text, but what's important to highlight, this is the figures and certain product names, because we need significant coverage, to ensure significant coverage. If you look at bullet point 3, this is providing therapy to 50 million people. This is the third line on the slide. And this is huge, including a lot of children. And also, I separately highlight the strategy 14624. This is the strategy that is being promoted by a lot of international organizations, Doctors Without Border, TB Protection Group, a lot of other organizations in the region supported it. In particular, they speak about the need to switch to new treatments, modern treatments. I will not focus on all of them, but one of them, and this one includes a range of new products, people regimen with certain variations. This is pretemanid, quinine. These are new products, and if we want to switch to that regimen, it requires efforts. Among other things, as you can see based on the theme of our webinar, it includes an important link with the patent, with exclusive rights and the patent protected status. This is my introduction, and now we can proceed with the next slide. So it's obvious that access to treatment is one of essential components, and this strategy has a lot of areas. It is quite extensive and detailed, but access to treatment is needed. It is a required component for the strategy to work. So we have this puzzle. Here you can see pill and the vial, and also you can see in the Russian version 2 signs around this vial. And these are patents. So here I wanted to indicate the connection, the link with IP rights. So we will hardly be in the position to get full-fledged access so that our strategy works, so that TB were fully eradicated, unless we focus on IP and patents aspects. For the purposes of this presentation, I will speak about them as synonyms, patents and IP. So when I say patents, that also implies, in this case, IP, even though IP it is much wider than patents, but let's put it simple today. So let's switch to the next slide. And here I'm sure that many of you, maybe each of you to that extent have been involved into aspects of access to treatment. And not always we speak only about patents there. Some obvious things that occur to us in this context include various document-related barriers, like registration of the product, that may be about procurement lists, whether certain products are included there or not, essential medications lists, treatment guidelines, and so on and so forth. So this is the documentation-based set of rules and requirements. And we don't know if a certain product is included into this list or no, and that may be a barrier on the path of access. Budget constraints, of course, no budget, no access to product, that's quite straightforward. And this is something that is being discussed actively. Price barrier, also known as a high price. This is a frequent problem, and let me mention that the price is high price is directly related to patents and IP. Logistic issues, that's also quite obvious, and unfortunately in our region it is a frequent problem where drugs, products for certain reasons are not delivered on time, and also planning and lack of information. So there are a lot of barriers, and sometimes we have to have these discussions with various experts or activists who say that the issue of patents is linked with prices, but that's not the most important thing because we have a number of other issues that need to be addressed: logistics, informing, information, treatment protocol, and of course that's true. But going back to that slide with the puzzle pieces, again, the aspect of price and IP, these are things that are mandatory components, pieces of the puzzle to make sure that our strategy is not only for TB, but also for HIV, for viral hepatitis, for oncology, for any disease that requires treatment. We can only address these issues having all of these parts of the puzzle to have the strategy implemented. Now let's move on. If so far you don't have questions, and if you do have questions, you can start writing them in the chat, and in the course of my presentation, I will try to address them. Now speaking about the price barrier, this is most obvious thing. Usually price barriers arise because of monopolies. And I was thinking about which picture to use. I decided on Scrooge McDuck. I'm not sure he was a monopolist, but anyway, we know that he was basing in gold and stuff. So monopolies, this is about exclusive position in the market where there are no competitors, to put it simply, and they may have various reasons. In particular, this may be collusion or preferences of the by the state, where the government prefers certain companies, and of course patents. That's kind of legal monopoly, and you see the definition below. It is an right or title for a set period of offering exclusive rights for an invention. In English version, exclusive is not highlighted, but that's key because it is about the key value of patent to ensure access. The company that has the patent has the exclusive right to decide what to do about a certain product. And let's go one slide back where we speak about barriers. As you have noticed, I guess, in the list of these barriers, I do not indicate patents. However, you remember the slide that we have just addressed. A patent, this is about exclusive right, and the patent owner has the exclusive right to make decisions on registering or not registering the product. If you consider the first barrier in the document, the patent owner can make the decision whether they submit this product for the essential list of essential medications or not, to include it into the procurement list or not, to supply it to the market or not. This is the inclusive right offered by the patent. Same about the price. Of course, the patent makes it possible to actually set the price. In some countries, there are ways to regulate prices for treatment so that the patent owner were not too greedy, to put it simply, and even logistic issues and insufficient amount of information, all of that is linked to patents. Because, again, I reiterate that that's an important link that is not always that obvious. I mean, patent, that's not only about the right of a company to set any price. Patent, it's what makes it possible for the company to do whatever they wish about the patent, to make the decision on how accessible that's going to be for the patient. And in this or that way, all the barriers are linked with exclusive rights, with patent rights. And now let's go back to the next slide. And let's switch once again, and then we continue. So another step back, and let's look at how activism starts in the field of access to treatment. This is a photo of a rally that happened 11 or 12 years ago in St. Petersburg, where there were problems with access to treatment and supplies of medications. In our case, activism, of course, started where people did not get the pills, the products. Non-commercial patient organizations protecting their rights found that out, and based on that, they developed their advocacy, and that's logical because the patient movement starts where people need treatment, and this is the first step from where all the further advocacy and analytical work proceed. And now let's go to the next slide. So when we speak about, well, we could present that in a different way as a staircase, but here it is kind of going down, but the idea is the same. This is about step-by-step movement, at least in ECA region. The organizations that helped patients receive their products, this is a certain kind of a service, and at a certain point, these people try to understand what's the problem, why there is shortage of product, why people complain that there are these issues. And that's not only about HIV, that there were problems with TB therapy and hepatitis C therapy. And I'm sure that for other diseases, the situation was similar, but our organization just doesn't deal with other diseases. But from time to time, I read in the news that there are problems with products against to treat diabetes, oncology, etc. So the next step is to understand what the system can do. Our task as that of activists, organizations, or people who try to help people is to address the issues that arise. But at a certain point, it becomes insufficient. This is where you need to develop systemic solutions, where you need to develop the system in such a way that there are fewer of such issues and the system is efficient. And the next step, at least in our region, what we do, this is analysis of procurements. If you remember previous slides, maybe I will not go back to them, but one of the barriers was about procurement lists and prices. So organizations started analyzing what's being procured, what kind of medications, at which prices, how timely they are supplied, and so on and so forth. So the entire picture had to be seen. Mostly that was done for HIV, but also, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in 2015, we already had first analytical reports on TB, mostly on second-line treatment, which is more expensive already, and this is also to a great extent due to patents. And based on that experience, now more organizations in the region develop the serious analytics on TB. Then, when we realized that now it is about prices. So when you conduct the analysis there, everything is quite straightforward. You develop this diagram, this chart, and you see which products are more expensive, which are cheaper, and then the price of one medication goes very high, and we realized that most likely more people could have access to treatment unless this price were so high. This is quite straightforward. However, sometimes you need quite a lot of analytical work to arrive at that conclusion. And of course, then the next question is why the price is so high. And this brings us back to intellectual property right, to this exclusive right. Often, not always, let me emphasize, but often the problem of high price is about the exclusive monopoly position of a company due to patent rights. Since a company has its patent, it can do more or less everything with the product, including setting or dictating prices. And this is where activists started doing patent analysis. This is not the most engaging theme. And sometimes when I start presenting on access to treatment and patents, I often say that actually it's not a happy reason why our organization started exploring patent field. You know that we have a lot of things to do even without that. We have a lot of other issues, other barriers, and dealing with patent analysis, which is quite complicated. There are chemical aspects and serious legal aspects. So it would be possible maybe to do without that, but would it be? No, because the system impacts access. And that is why we started dealing with patent analysis, and at a certain phase, we proceeded with specific actions. Based on this analysis, NGOs started submitting, they started contesting patents, started promoting the forced licenses campaigns and challenging patents. Well, I explain that later. And patient organizations in this way started to act to get rid of to address some issues associated with IP. I hope that I have explained this steps well enough. Well, actually, here it is downwards, but actually these are steps that go up. So starting with some issues caused by partners and why by patents and why our organizations deal with that. Our region, Eastern Europe and Central Asia, for a long time we've been moving towards this patent work. Of course, in other countries, it started much earlier in Latin America, in Asia, Africa. But now there is this international movement, community of activists and NGOs who recognize that that's a huge issue, exclusive right to products, that's an issue. And something needs to be done to address that from the point of view of access to treatment. Now let's move on, unless you have questions already. If you do have questions, write them in the chat. And now let's look at this slide. I don't know if you see it well, but actually this is a piece of theory. How patents influence access to treatment and how they work. This is very basic. Let me explain and speak about some items that you see here. So among other things, you see these three arches. Each of these arches or curves, that's a period of patent monopoly. And according to international agreements, it should be at least 20 years. A company has at least 20 years of monopoly for certain inventions. It may be more, it may be extended for 5 years, but let's now focus on this 20. And there are three of these curves or arches. That means that this is not about just one patent. This is about three patents in this case. So we have one patent, second one, third one. And for each patent, there are these 20 years of monopoly, which the company can enjoy. And now let's focus on these circles. Each circle is a patent. So 1, 2, 3, this is start of the validity of the patent, red, orange, and blue. And at the end, that's the period where the patent ends. So you see that these arches go from one circle to another, and this is about this period of 20 years of monopoly. During this period, the company earns money, as you can see on the top. Then the company receives the next patent. An important conclusion that can be made here that there may be several patents. For the same product, there may be several patents. And the most important patent, this is the patent for the chemical composition, the components, the active component of the pill. If you take TB, this is pidiquilin or delamanid or pretamine, scazolide. This is the molecule as presented here. Graphically, this is the active ingredient. Then the company may receive another patent for process, for production process. And you see, this is the second curve. This is 20 years of monopoly or more, but it goes longer, right? So then it gives the company all in all like 22 years of monopoly. Next patent for a salt, for a certain formula, for crystal forms, etc. 20 more, right? And this is the third curve that goes even further, and totally it may be 25 years. And of course, at a certain phase, one needs to reduce the price. When the patent expires, generics can enter the market. So the theme of patents is very much about generics as well. So here you can see that eventually when all the patents expire, generics come to the market. When the main API patent is over, this is quite an indefinite period where generics are not yet fully accessible. And that's important from the point of view of access to treatment. We know, based on our experience, that only due to accessibility of generics, it was possible to significantly increase the number of people who have ART for HIV treatment. This is a historical fact. There was significant reduction of the price due to introduction of generics. And most likely something similar will be observed for TB. And I'll take a pause here because this is quite a complex slide, and this is the only one here that explains how patents work and how they are important for access to treatment. If there are any questions, please write them in the chat. But the bottom line is that the patent offers the exclusive right. There may be several patents. There may be the basic patent for API, and it acts for 20 years at least, but the company may have this additional patents for manufacturing process, for formulas. For example, TB Alliance is now submitting a patent application for BIPAL, as we discussed at the beginning, this regimen. So this patent, if it is issued, now they are challenging it, but anyway, it will protect this regimen as a way to treat TB. Why TB Alliance is doing that, but for some reason they're doing that. There are patents for various formulas, formulations, pills. There may be a lot of patents. I did not include everything there, but there is this famous picture like a tree of patents where you can see a lot of circles and a lot of various lines, and all of them imply various patents, secondary, tertiary, and so on and so forth. These are key ideas for this slide. And now let's move on. So what shall we do? What can activists do in the field of access to treatment and IP? And really, you see that a lot of time is required to sort it out. Where we started, so here I'm going to speak about our experience. So first of all, we followed the news and what was published by our partners, the organizations that we trusted. There were a lot of materials, a lot of campaigns, and following them is important. And I'm sure that many of you follow what happens with bidiquilin, for example, in the region. And at a certain point, we started joining certain campaigns. We tried to clarify some details of those campaigns associated with intellectual property. And we tried to join them, to step in, to sign the requirements. Do you have any question there? maybe not. So in the field of TB, for the known campaigns, for example, we supported the campaign Time for $5. This is about cartridges for a Gen Expert. And these campaigns for Aquilin, some of them have been initiated by us. The next phase, these were already independent requests and letters, messages, addresses where we could see some issues. So UN agencies, other international organizations that deal with that. Another step, as we mentioned, this is analysis that shows the connection between limited access and patents. So in every country, there is a certain program to treat TB, certain procurement mechanisms for TB drugs. And it is possible to analyze that all. It is possible to see whether key products are accessible. If we go to Bepal, Bidetquilin, Pretamanid, it is possible to check other new products for MDR, TB, Dilamanid, for example, and there we can see if there are any issues like high prices, limited access. Hence, we try to check what's happening with the patents. It is possible to do that independently. A bit later, I will ask organizers to publish the link in the chat, but you can explore, analyze that on your own, and then at a certain stage, and it is possible to directly oppose, challenge patents, organize campaigns for the compulsory licensing. This is where we temporarily limit this exclusive right, including for the needs of public health systems. So mostly it is the decision made by the government or court that makes it possible to temporarily limit, restrict the exclusive right of patent owner, and for example, for a short period of time, introduce generics so that everybody got therapy. And so this is the list of possible actions. Some are easy, some are more challenging, but this is step-by-step movement that naturally every patient community undergo when fighting for the general access. Several examples of TB drugs. The key TB drugs that activists are now focused on is bedaquiline, pretamanid, delamanid. Linezolid is now off patent. I just added that as part of Bepal regimen. So let's check the slide that shows the patent status. This is the next slide. And here, please post in the chat the link that I sent. This is the website where you can independently check the patents in our country, in your country. So here you see various patents for bedaquiline, for pretamanid, for delamanid. And I understand that this presentation will be accessible to you. So thank you, Alexandra. You can look through, you will be able to see what's patented in your country, what's not. Pretamanid is not yet. There is this application for Bepal for bedaquiline. There are quite a lot of secondary patents. Janssen recently withdrew those patents, and I will mention that at the end. And so on and so forth. I will now focus in more detail on that, but all of this data are from this database, and initially for activists, that's very helpful because it makes it possible to see what happens to patents for certain products in your country. And let's go to the last slide, last but one. These are examples of campaigns for bedaquiline now. A lot of campaigns in the region: Kazakhstan, Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Ukraine, Georgia. All of these countries are implementing the campaigns that are aimed at bedaquiline to make sure that the patent owner did not apply for additional patents, as I showed on the slide for bedaquiline. And due to public support, due to support of our Indian friends who made an important work, implemented important work in India. Recently, the campaign announced that they will not apply for secondary patents. And so soon in our region, quite a lot of bedaquiline generics are going to appear. And this is a result of very long and intense work for TB and IP. And my last slide. So actually, it is about questions and discussion. I hope that I have explained the link between patents and access to treatment in a more or less understandable way. And I go back here to 14624 strategy, especially line 6, where we see bedaquiline and tretamine. These are new products with certain patent nuances, especially bedaquiline. And in order to have full access to them, going back to the first slide, to our strategy, TB strategy, we need to address certain issues that are linked with patents, about patents, and a lot of organizations globally and regionally are doing that. Here, I'm going to stop my presentation and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you, Sergey, for this very presenting this sophisticated topic in a very simple words. I believe that it was a detailed explanation and discussion. Now, dear participants, do you have any practical questions that Sergey is ready to answer? You can write your questions in the chat. You can raise your hand and speak up. You're welcome. While we are waiting for questions, I will ask you to post a couple of other links that I sent to you in the chat. The first one, it shows the price difference that we may achieve for TB products due to accessibility of generics. There are analysts who analyze that. Dr. Hill, in particular from Liverpool University, he publishes a lot of analytical information about price of medicines. In particular, he analyzed TB drug prices, and he proved that if we switch to generic regimen, then access to state-of-the-art TB treatment could be increased manifold, and thus we could approach the goal, the target of TB eradication. You can read the article, the paper, you can see, check your prices for bedaquiline in your country, if it can be brought down and to what extent. And the second link, these are minutes of meetings with pharmaceutical companies, including those that produce TB drugs, and there is a discussion on patents. Thank you for publishing these links. Any questions? I believe that participants are thinking about those now. Let me ask a question now, Sergey. Why do you believe the campaign against Johnson & Johnson had such a good result? What was the key aspect? What helped activists to achieve this result? Thank you for that question. It is very relevant, that's true. I believe that it was. So let me start from basic statement that campaigns aimed at addressing patent related issues will always be sophisticated and complex and long. It's hard to come up with a campaign that would help to immediately address a patent relation question. The bedaquiline campaign took many years. So the paper that I sent to you is of 2015. So back then, when it was clear that bedaquiline would be very important to treat TB, back then people started thinking about patents, and back then they started publishing information about that. For a certain amount of money, it is possible to bring the price down, and then a lot of organizations globally joined. That's also a very important component because the pressure on the campaign was from various countries, from rich countries as well, US and European activists joined, countries in our region, India, and that was a multi-vector campaign. Some organizations implemented some public initiatives, some challenged for patents that have more expertise in India, in our countries. Other organizations worked directly with patent owners and had correspondence with them, convincing them. So there were very different mechanisms. Some wrote messages to governments, and I believe that is something that made the campaign very successful. This is multi-vector approach and extensive coverage, and the long period of that, because it was developed long time in advance. And we will see how the access to treatment will change, because now we have heard these announcements, and we will see how we will progress towards eradication of TB with the help of generics, and we will see how big the coverage is going to be, and we will think about other barriers, how we overcome them. Thank you so much, Sergey. Maybe you have more questions now. Yes, we still have several minutes. You're welcome. If I may, I didn't raise my hand, but we have this comment or question in the chat. And if it doesn't take too much time, maybe, well, this is a separate theme for discussion. But my question is this: what are the terms and conditions to have a patent officially withdrawn? What can a company break? What kind of terms and requirements so that they lost their patent? And if there are such cases? Yes, thank you for that question. That's an important theme. I will try to briefly present it. So there are rules according to which governments issue patents, and these rules, they're quite straightforward. A patent, so the invention actually needs to be new, it needs to have certain inventory level, and it needs to be reproducible industrially. And the problem for a lot of patents for medicines is about that sometimes it is not that innovative. A lot of patents, so patient organizations now challenge many of those patents because companies, they introduce some minor changes in salts and production processes that are already in place, and in this way they expand their monopoly period. You remember that slide with those curves? 20, then 25 years, then they introduce something else. That was the same story about bedaquiline, because the patent expired in 2023, but the company had a lot of secondary patents for salts, and that's what was challenged. In some countries, there is rigid legislation. In India, they challenge a lot of patents for medications. In Argentina, they also challenge a lot of patents. And there are success stories in our region as well, in Ukraine, at the level of Eurasia Patent Organization. So this is about quite serious discussions about the validity of patents in Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Moldova, Georgia, Belarus. So actually, the idea is that not every patent is a good patent, especially if it is about treatments. And there are quite a lot of success stories. And again, I highlight India, Argentina, and other countries in our region. And we have another question, and from Paul. You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. A concern that we have is that our region includes much of Western Europe, relatively wealthy countries with small amounts of tuberculosis. And the companies are not interested in applying for registration with the EU registration body, the European Medicines Agency, or the other national ones in Britain and elsewhere, because the market for the drugs are too small. And so we've got the idiot situation that if you're living in a rich country, you're less likely to be able to get hold of the latest TB drugs. And I wonder, there are a number of questions around this, but the first issue for me is what happened to what most countries are getting hold of the latest TB drugs, but because they are pre-qualified by WHO. Now, that's not accepted as full registration by the wealthy countries with their own regulatory systems. So for me, a question is, how could we expand or get governments to accept WHO pre-qualification for certain drugs such as bedaquiline, rifapentine, and so on? So, and the more general question behind this for me is, where should we be aiming our advocacy? At the pharmaceutical companies, at the governments, or at the regulatory bodies? Thank you.
Yeah. If it's okay, I'll answer in English. Thank you very much for the question. Yeah, I totally understand the situation because I even know some people with TB in Europe who had troubles with, for example, getting bedaquiline, which costs ridiculously high, ridiculously low. I mean, the numbers are just absolutely huge. And yeah, I think this is my personal view. I think it's should be more towards maybe the European Commission and the governments, so the regulatory bodies and the European Commission, because I heard that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the European Commission did issue a number of documents trying to solve this IP problem. There is this roadmap. I don't exactly recall the full name of the document, but there are talks within the European Commission about solving this IP issue. And I think what you mentioned about WHO pre-qualification in certain cases, I think this is something we should definitely discuss with our governments, and maybe at an even higher level, as is the European Commission, and probably EMA. I don't know whether EMA plays any political role in this regard, but probably more technical discussions should also happen at the level of EMA. So I don't know if it answers your questions, but these are just my spontaneous thoughts on that. But I do agree it's a difficult situation in terms of the size of the market and the problem, and still some people need the drugs. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Спасибо, Сергей. У нас еще есть маленький вопрос в чате.
Thank you. And we have a short question in the chat, and we will wrap up then. So the question is if in the future it will be possible to have a more detailed discussion about compulsory and voluntary licensing, where there are options for involving NGOs and communities. Yes, let's do that. I can speak about that endlessly. Okay, then that's going to be one of our next topics in the next year. And sorry for interrupting. Maybe now I could send the link in the chat if we still have 1 more minute for you to read about that. But otherwise, I'm ready also to meet separately and to discuss this theme. Okay, I will do that separately, maybe a bit later. Yes, we will send all of this information, all of these presentations, recording of the webinar, and we ask all the participants to now have your video on for us to make a family photo. If you can do that, please now start your video.
И будем рады вас видеть в следующем году. Я думаю, у нас будет еще много тем.
I believe that we will have a number of other occasions and topics to discuss where we can step in, what could be done not only in Vietza region, but also at the global level. I believe that's going to be quite relevant. And thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity to speak, to cover this very important theme. Thank you for your comments.